Continuing on halachot of Bet Knesset in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf Nun Aleph, and we are in the middle of the longer first saif of Shulchan Aruch. What you can and what you cannot do in Bet Knesset, realizing that it's Makom Kadosh, Va'ahi lahem lemikdash me'at, says the pasuk in Yecheskel, and Shulchan Aruch writes, En ochlim v'shotim b'hem. You cannot eat and drink in a Bet Knesset or a Bet Midrash, V'lo mitkashtim b'hem. You don't beautify yourself or put makeup. Velo metailin bahem. You don't hang out, so to speak, in the shul. Velo nechnasim bahem. Bechama mipnei hachama. You don't take shelter from sun or from rain in the Bet Knesset. But then the Shulchan Aruch adds, Talmidei Chachamim v'Talmidehem, people who are learning Torah and they spend most of the day in the Bet Knesset, in the Bet Midrash, and it's difficult for them to have to go home to eat and come back, and that waste of time is not something that they could afford. Mutarin le'echol v'lishtot b'hem mitochak. Push comes to shove in extenuating circumstances. When you don't have a kitchen, you don't have a side room, then they could eat and drink in the Bet Knesset. And of course, the Rama writes, even Shlomo midochak in Bet Midrash. Bet Midrash is a place that's made for learning Torah. So even if you have a side coffee room, you can take your coffee and drink it as you learn in order to enhance your learning and not have to waste any time. So that is mutar, says the Ramasa, says the Mishna Berura. This fact that you don't eat and drink in the Bet Knesset is not just eating and drinking, but you don't do any melacha, you don't do any work, any job in the Bet Knesset because of the same exact reason. Now, how about smoking? Smoking, of course, Chacham Ovadia in already 1981 writes it's not the proper thing. The doctors already knew back then that it affects the health of a person in a negative way and shortens the life expectancy in a normal spectrum. But at the end of his life, the last time that he wrote about this, he actually came out saying that smoking is asur, and so on. He became more strong as the years developed, and it became more clear that this is actually something that damages the health. But nevertheless, Rav Moshe Feinstein actually has a tshuva that he wrote in the 70s. He speaks about smoking, but he's speaking really about not just cigarettes, but he's specifically, I think, it was written about marijuana and other things. He writes that Yisur Doraita, he has 3 different reasons for it in the tshuva over there, and therefore it becomes a question, even according to those who feel that it's not completely asur. There's this logic of Shomer P'ta'im Hashem that's brought even by Rav Moshe Feinstein himself in a different tshuva and so on. Let's imagine that smoking would not be necessarily halachically asur at all times. Is it mutar to smoke in Bet Knesset, or is that considered disrespectful? The Kaf HaChaim already writes, and back in the days of the Kaf HaChaim, they actually felt that smoking is a very healthy thing. It's good for your mind, it's good for your digestive system. This is something that they really believed in, that is a good thing to smoke. And it was considered a fancy thing in the beginning, and then it became the tobacco companies and so on. It made it a public plague, so to speak. It became, with advertisements and so on, became more of a in thing for people, or a fancy thing, and then cool thing for people to smoke. But Kaf HaChaim already back then writes that this is asur in the Bet Knesset. You cannot smoke in Bet Knesset. It's considered disrespectful. It's like achila is no different than achila v'shtiya, so therefore you can't do it. Now, the truth of the matter is there are other Choshe Mishpat questions about this as well. Imagine if you want to smoke, even in a different room that's not Bet Knesset, but a public domain, and other people do not like it. This is, someone says, I want to be intaking your, what do you call it, secondhand smoke, because it's even more unhealthy than the first hand, because it's not filtered and so on. So someone says, I don't want it. Can they stop? And the halacha would have it that actually they can, because you're damaging someone else in a public domain that does not belong to you. So that would be additional questions about smoking as well. But nevertheless, the Ben Ish Chai says the same thing as the Kef HaChaim, and the smelling of different besamim or different things that they have, tobacco, or tabak that they pass around. It's like a minhag of the olden times, at least, especially among the Sfaradim, and fiyeh, whatever they had, they would pass around to smell. That the Kaf HaChaim writes already. The minhag is to be mekel, so therefore he does not oppose it in that way. But nevertheless, smoking will be a bigger question. Now, if you do kaparot, can you do kaparot in the Bet Knesset? Especially nowadays that some people cannot really do it outside because of certain goyim activists of animal rights and so on and so forth. Do we want to do it like in the area of Bet Knesset? And that also would be disrespectful. It's not something that you could do in the Bet Knesset. The Ben Ish Chai already writes this. That's asur to do it. It's not disrespectful of the Makom HaMikdash and Makom of Bet Knesset. And Kaf HaChaim seems to say the same thing. The baking of matzot, right? Even though that's matzat mitzvah and so on and so forth, Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul, his Talmidim really write in his name that that would be asur to do matzot in Bet Knesset. That's not, even though that matzah is sorach mitzvah and so on and so forth. Matzat mitzvah you're making very much timely question, but says Rabbi Tzimra Abba Shaul, you cannot do that. That's disrespectful for the Bet Knesset as well. Even though that's for matzat mitzvah of the Leil Seder, will be still a problem. Now, the Sherot Tshuva Torah Lishma, we generally speaking assume that it's the Ben Ish Chai, even though the Chacham Obadia has tshuva about it, and he doesn't seem to be very happy to assume that it is the Ben Ish Chai. It was written under a fictitious name of Yechaskel Kochli, which is actually the Gematria Yosef Chaim, the same name as the Ben Ish Chai. This was said by Rabbi Avram Ades Alav Shalom. He felt that he was the Ben Ish Chai, and we generally speaking assumed that he was the Ben Ish Chai. He writes in the Tshuva that even sharpening your knife for shchita, some people are learning how to become a shochet. Right, so they're learning halachot, and between when they get tired, they want to, it's also the umnut. It's a real expertise that you have to gain before you become a shochet. How to make a proper chalaf, a proper sakin shchita, and sometimes a person is sitting there in Bet Midrash and wants to do it, and it's part of learning Torah. Basically, you would assume that that's the problem. So the Ben Ish Chai writes in Torah Lishma, that's not really asur to do that. If you want to learn how to do hashchazat hasakin, that's melechet shamayim, and it's fine. You can learn it, he even goes into Kabbalistic concepts of certain tikkunim that are done through hashchazat hasakin and so on. Therefore, he writes it is not really asur. Now, how about doing halakha for a kid in Bet Knesset? What's known in the Ashkenazi circles as option or optionist, which once I have the mic, I could say in parentheses here that's not as far the minhag. Even though the Ariya Kadosh we find that did this, that writes the Maharchu to his son on the kever of Rashbi in Meron. He was not 3 years old, and Arizal had a lot of cheshbonot for what he did himself, but it was never a Sephardi minhag. Really, the earliest source that I know of this is, again, I may be incorrect, but what I know of is the Sherot Tshuvat Arugat Bosim. I think it's Siman Reshut that talks about this comparison of Adam Etzasadeh or La and so on and so forth. It's a nice minhag, but it's not one of those things that people think it's halacha Moshe Sinai that has to be done and so on. It's it's a nice thing to do if you can. And now becomes a question: can you do that in Bet Knesset? Right? So because it's tiglachat mitzvah, Chacham Obadia writes that you could do it. It's not a problem. The Kaf HaChaim writes similar thing as well, because the first time you're doing it, you mekayem the mitzvot of pe'ah and so on, and with it comes the mitzvah of tzitzit and chinuch habanim, for wearing a kippah and wearing a tzitzit and so on. So, therefore, we let it pass, even though that conceptually it's not something, it's a barber thing basically, and it's not necessarily a thing, but I don't give a full tiglachat necessarily. Always, it's like, starting him up as a yid, as someone that's going to start doing mitzvot and learning aleph bet, and so on. It's already from the time of Rokeach, it has been brought that the kid that starts speaking, you bring him wrapped in a talit, you bring him to the cheder, to the bet midrash, and you have aleph bet otiot, and you put honey on it, and he licks it, and he says there in psukim how to start up a little child. That's a beautiful and important thing as well, that people do. Now, how about selling Sifrei Kodesh in Bet Knesset? You see, sometimes you have peddlers that go around, especially in the smaller cities, that they don't have their own Judaica, or even if they do have their own Judaica, you have always people on the move, that they come, set up shop, they set up some tables in the Bet Knesset, they want to do it. Usually they do it nowadays outside the Bet Knesset, in the hallway or so on. But is it mutar to sell Sifrei Kodesh in Bet Knesset? The Ben Ish Chai actually speaks about this. Ben Ish Chai speaks about this, not in Sefer Ben Ish Chai, but in his Tshuvot of Rapa'alim, and he says it's mutar. There's no real problem with selling Sfarim in Bet Knesset, even if he does it not fully lishma. He's actually making a parnasa from this. Still mutar. It's melechet shamayim. It's mitzvah. He writes this in Chelek Bet of Rapa'alim in Siman Chavdalit, that the buying of the Sfarim is a mitzvah, and therefore it could be done in Bet Knesset as well. Now, says the Mishnah Berura, this that he cannot enter the shul to take shelter in the Bet Knesset from sun or from rain, writes the Chafetz Chaim, Velo mehani sheyikra o yishne. It doesn't help that you say, okay, I'm going to go there, I'm going to sit and read a little bit Chumash, Tehillim, I'm going to say a Mishnah, as we will see later on, in certain circumstances that does help. Says the Chafetz Chaim, here it doesn't help. It does not help. Why? Because you could go to a different house, you could go to a different place to save yourself from sun and or from rain, and therefore it's not considered a heter. Now, of course, if you don't have any other place and you're going in to learn as well, that would be, of course, a legitimate heter. Now, im lo shasak mikodem be'ezet var halacha b'chutz v'tkil ha'kshayim rered. The case in the Gemara there is, I think he's referring to that if you're already learning outside, you're just standing outside and learning, it's nice weather, and now it starts raining, so you go in to continue learning. Of course, that is completely mutar, no problem with that whatsoever. Now, Mishnah Berura writes, "V'hu adin de'musechu anshe ha'il lefi sha'a la'achil b'hem orchim aniyim or la'ashkivan sham demutar." That not only talmidei chachamim, it's mutar for them to eat and drink in Bet Knesset and Bet Midrash midochak, but even if it's achilat mitzvah, so you have aniyim that have no place, and you want to provide for the meals in the Bet Knesset, in Bet Midrash, even you want to give them a place to stay, to sleep, they have no other place, and this is mitzvah ha'achlasat orchim, that's considered also a midochak, and you could do it on a temporary basis for someone that doesn't have a place to stay and doesn't have a place to eat. Aval zeu rak davka bebate knesiot shebechutz la'aretz. Here is the first time that we see a difference between Bet Knesset in Eretz Yisrael and Bet Knesset in Chutz La'aretz. As we'll see this more elaborately explained later on in Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim, there are differences, halachically speaking, between Batei Knesiot in Eretz Yisrael and Batei Knesiot outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the Mishnah Berura says, Yesh osim gam bazeh. Some even are machmir in this case, but when push comes to shove, says the Chafetz Chaim, in extenuating circumstances, you don't have to be specific about this. You could be mekel. Now, Chacham Ovadia, they write in his name also in the sefer that was published, Me'en Omer, in the psakim of Chacham Obadiah, that people who are aniyim, and they were left without korat ruach, they became homeless, they don't have a place to rest, or this has become extremely nogea l'maaseh, unfortunately, since 6 months ago, when the war broke out in Eretz Yisrael, and now complete shchunot are evacuated, small cities are emptied from people, and many of these people don't have a place. It's beautiful to see Klal Yisrael come together. All the people who own real estate from United States and United Kingdom, they're letting people stay in their homes and so on. But it's not only that. There are many people who mamash don't have a place to stay, and in those cases, Chacham Obadiah held that you could, of course, host them in Bet Knesset, in Chutz La'aretz, but not in the case that you have in Eretz Yisrael right now, because Eretz Yisrael, again, it becomes much bigger of a deal in terms of Kedushat Bet Knesset and what that involves with building it al Tanai and conditionally, as we will discuss this all at length, Bezrat Hashem, in the days to come. But nevertheless, Le'echol v'lishtot, let's finish at least this piece over here. The eating and drinking of the Talmidei Chachamim v'Talmidehem, learners of Torah, v'hu adin lishon deshari, even sleeping. If he's in the middle of learning and he's tired and he wants to put his head down for a moment to rejuvenate himself and be able to learn more, and he wants to rest, that's also fine, even sleeping in the Bet Knesset. Aval asot kapandaria. But something that's disrespectful of a bizayon level to the Bet Knesset, that you cannot do. So therefore, even a Talmid Chacham, even a Ben Torah that's learning the whole day in the Bet Knesset, learning the whole day in the Bet Midrash, cannot make a shortcut through Bet Knesset or Bet Midrash. That's already very disrespectful. Or likanes b'hem b'chama b'pnei chama b'kshamim b'kshamim. Hani dil kaman v'choshken schok, and certainly goes without saying that you cannot joke around, even if you're a Talmid Chacham and you live in Bet Midrash most of the day. Still, that does not allow you to disgrace the place by making it a shortcut, and certainly not by joking around and speaking idle talk of Sicha Betela. All of those are asur. Te'atu Talmid Chacham in Muzhar al Moram Hamikdash. Would the Talmid Chacham not be metzuveh? Wouldn't be careful on a mitzvah of Mikdashi Tirau, of Morah HaMikdash? Of course he is. If anything, he should be more careful than other people. And again, as we mentioned before, the Ben Ish Chai writes that smoking is considered part of Achila V'Shtia. So the same thing that we said before, that you cannot smoke in the Bet Knesset and Bet Midrash, assuming that, of course, smoking would be mutar, then for whoever could do achila v'shitya midochak in Bet Knesset, the same would apply to smoking. But again, as we mentioned, there are two other things. First and foremost, Chacham Obadiah wrote towards the end of his life that it's asur. Secondly, under Moshe Feinstein, as we mentioned, also you have to make sure that this does not infringe on other people's rights of being there, because that becomes a choshen mishpat question, which would actually be the right of those people to stop it and to protest and express their displease of that, and would stop halachically the rights for the person to do it. So it says. This is actually the Chacham Ben Sura, I think, says this. I mean, one of the only people who I think actually says this is the Or Letzion. He says that that's given, that you're not bothering other people. If you're bothering other people, then you should not be doing it. And even if you are, other people could actually protest and stop you from being able to do it. Fine. So that's. Now sleeping, that's mutar for Talmidei Chachamim, even though that the Gemara says, the Gemara dashes from a pasuk, Kraim talbish numa, that a person that sleeps in the middle of his learning, he's going to forget his learning. His Torah becomes nasid keraim, he becomes shreds, and he's not going to remember his learning. But l'maaseh, that's when you're dozing off in the middle of your learning. But if you want to stop and have a little afternoon power nap after you ate lunch or whatnot, to be able to learn afterwards properly, that's not included in that Gemara of Kraim Talbish Numa, as Chacham Obadia would explain that Gemara. Now, the Talmidei Chachamim who eat in Bet Midrash lunch and they want to shmooze, or they have a Motzai Shabbat program, whatever it is, and they want to have like their pizza and shmooze. Chacham says even there you have to be careful not to speak divrei chol, even mundane things, as much as possible. You want to minimize the idle talk and activities that are chol in the Bet Knesset and Bet Midrash, and try to keep it only miyuchad for divrei Torah and divrei Kedusha. Bezrat Hashem, we will be discussing and continuing this in the days to come. Chazak u'baruch.